GamingBolt presents the 15 craziest Death Stranding theories that just may be true. It all makes sense if you really think about it. The mad mind of the genius we all know as Hideo Kojima works in funny and magnificent ways. The upcoming Death Stranding marks the first time in many years that the game designer is making a game that isn't part of the Metal Gear saga, and frankly, that is incredibly exciting. With nothing to bind him, with no previous structure to adhere to, Kojima is free to make any kind of game he wants. And we're quite sure that that freedom, coupled with his unbridled ambition, is going to lead to some wonderful things. But even after having seen 3 pretty meaty trailers for the game, we still don't know what Death Stranding is going to be like, or what it's going to be about. In fact, the number of questions we have about the game has only increased with each new trailer. That said, there have been a lot of exciting theories going around about what Death Stranding is going to be about. Some surprisingly well thought out, and some, well, not so much. In this feature, we're going to take a look at what we feel are 15 of the best and most interesting theories that we've read, or could think of, about the upcoming game. We know you're going to have a lot to say about them by the time we're done, so don't forget to leave your feedback in the comments below. And with that out of the way, let's get right into it. Stranded between life and death. Okay, so think of Dark Souls or Bloodborne. Those games actively make death a mechanic and justify that within the story by emphasizing how the character is cursed to never being able to die. Now, what if this is true in Death Stranding too? There are multiple indications that this might be the case, that narratively Death Stranding's title may literally refer to being stranded between life and death. From the corpses that seem to come back to life in the trailers, to Norman Reedus' character being able to do that as well, to the very name of the game, Death Stranding may tackle a person trapped in limbo between life and death forever. Nuclear explosion. We're definitely not the first people to come up with this theory. We're probably not even in the first million, to be honest. It seems pretty obvious, but given how everything related to Death Stranding is up in the air at the moment, and how there's no information that is absolutely set in stone, this remains, for all intents and purposes, a theory. From everything we've seen and heard of the game so far, it seems like it's set in the backdrop of some sort of massive explosion, either nuclear or cosmic in nature. This explosion, it seems, has had some pretty bizarre effects, and we think it might have torn a hole in space and time. Ground Zero. In fact, we also have a vague idea of what Ground Zero for the aforementioned explosion might be. The crest of the organization named TORO'S, which basically seems to be a map of the intriguingly named United Cities of America, was prominently featured in the 3rd trailer of Death Stranding, which debuted at December's The Game Awards. If you pay close attention to the map of the USA depicted in the crest, though, you'll see a very noticeable hole where Washington, D.C. and New Jersey should be. What's more, the map shown in the crest seems to be covered by a large spiderweb of sorts, and the web seems to be originating from the very same hole. Does this mean that hole was where the explosion we keep hearing about took place? Across time and space. Let's keep with the theory of an explosion that ripped a hole in time for just a little bit. This theory seems as strong as it does for a really simple reason. If you watch the 2nd and 3rd trailers for Death Stranding, you'll immediately notice a very obvious difference in the locations where both these trailers took place. The 2nd trailer is set in a war-ravaged city with machinery and weaponry that seems like it belongs in a World War battlefield, whereas the 3rd trailer looks like it's taking place in either a barren alien world or an Earth in the far distant future where all resources have run dry. The obvious explanation seems to be that, thanks to this hole in time that we can't shut up about, the story of Death Stranding will hop between several time periods, both in the past and in the future. What we cannot explain, though, is that bizarre inverted rainbow. Interdimensional beings. These massive monsters or entities, or whatever you want to call them, have been featured quite prominently in Death Stranding's trailers so far, especially in the last one. It seems like they have some sort of weird obsession with capturing people and transporting them to, well, someplace. However, it looks like the people in Death Stranding know a way to work around this issue. If they die, these interdimensional beings suddenly don't seem interested in taking them captive anymore. There were actually 2 moments in the 3rd trailer that lend this theory credence. When the first guy, who was crushed under the vehicle, is being dragged away, Sam's companion shoots him in the head, at which point the beings stop dragging him away. Later on in that video, when the same person's on the brink of being taken away, he proceeds to repeatedly stab himself in the chest. Clearly, the interdimensional beings only seem to be interested in people as long as they are alive. One of the beings might be female. Okay, this one's a little thin, and we're not exactly sure what bearing it may or may not have on the game's story, but it definitely qualifies as interesting. One of the 5 figures that's repeatedly shown in the 2 trailers, one of those 5 interdimensional beings, looks like a woman. What's more, and you have to look really, really close, and even at that point we might be wrong about this, it looks like she's carrying a child. Given how babies have been a major theme of all Death Stranding trailers so far, it might have some significance. Oh, and that incidentally brings us to our next point. The baby. It's pretty clear at this point that Sam, Norman Reedus' character in Death Stranding, and the baby we keep seeing seem to have some sort of connection, but what exactly might that connection be? A popular theory that we've read a lot about seems to suggest that the baby and Sam are actually one and the same. That the baby is, in some weird way, Sam's clone, and that Sam is capable of transferring his consciousness and memories into the baby. It's bizarre, yeah, but by Kojima standards, it's actually pretty mundane. At least the baby doesn't use photosynthesis, that we know of. Energy source. Alternatively, the baby, or babies, could also be a source of energy. If Death Stranding is indeed set in a world that's been ravaged by nuclear war or some other deadly explosion, it stands to reason that it must be running dangerously low on any resources that matter. Maybe they've even been completely depleted. In such a scenario, what if the babies we keep seeing are acting as some sort of a source of energy for the surviving people? It would certainly explain the tubes they're kept in and wired to, and why they're as important to the story as they seem to be. Also, this wouldn't exactly be the first time we've seen humans being used as a source of energy in fiction. DREAMCATCHER. If you watch the 3rd trailer closely, you'll notice that Sam is carrying a dreamcatcher with him. In case you don't know, dreamcatchers in some Native American cultures are hung over cradles, since it's believed that they protect infants and babies from harm. Interestingly enough, they also look like cobwebs. All 3 of these elements are features in Death Stranding quite prominently: the baby, the dreamcatcher, and the spiderweb. Coincidence? We think not, especially not in a Hideo Kojima game. So, is Sam using the dreamcatcher to protect the baby he carries with him? Also, is that the significance of the spiderweb that's visible so prominently on the United Cities of America map? The handprints. Handprints have been another very heavy-handed piece of imagery in all the Death Stranding trailers so far. We've seen them on the ground, we've seen them in oil, or what looks like oil, and most noticeably, we've seen them on Norman Reedus. It seems pretty clear right now that the handprints are some sort of a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. And it's also been confirmed by Kojima, at least to some degree, that Sam has special abilities as far as these 2 worlds are concerned. So, do the handprints on Sam's body signify anything special? Are they perhaps a visual representation of how many times he's died and come back to the world of the living? Guillermo del Toro's face. Watch the 2nd trailer of Death Stranding a little closely and you'll notice something quite peculiar, other than the inverted rainbow, and the creepy doll, and Mads Mikkelsen and his skeletal soldiers, I mean. If you look closely at Guillermo del Toro's face in the trailer, you'll see that he has a scar on the outline of his face, almost as if an entire section of his face was lifted off and replaced with something else. Has his character had a face transplant of some kind? What bearing does this even have on the story? We don't know, but it definitely seems important. Mads Mikkelsen's character. Mads Mikkelsen's character has to be one of the most interesting and enigmatic things to come out of the last 2 Death Stranding's trailers so far. Judging by his particularly ominous look, the fact that he seems to have some weird mystical abilities, and the fact that he can command those weird undead-looking soldiers, it's obvious that there's something off and something special about him. Is he possessed by one of the 5 massive interdimensional creatures? Is he a conduit for them, connecting them to a plane of existence where humans can exist? Or is he perhaps one of those creatures in human form? Mads Strands. Let's go back just a little bit though. How exactly is Mads Mikkelsen's character commanding those undead skull soldiers? In the second trailer, they seem to be connected to him through some sort of wires, but another way of looking at it might be that those wires are actually strands. This has of course been a common theme in everything we've seen in Death Stranding so far, and we know for a fact that this has some connection to Sam as well. So does this mean that Sam and Mads' character possess the same abilities? Maybe only Mads is using them in a much darker and more sinister way, perhaps by bringing the dead back to life, or some form of life, and using them to his benefit as soldiers. Trailers 2 and 3. This is actually a pretty common theory, and if you've been following Death Stranding as obsessively as we have, and have been obsessively analyzing every frame of every trailer we've seen so far, with the kind of craziness that only Hideo Kojima can inspire, then you probably know about this already. The theory is that the second and the third trailers of Death Stranding are actually happening at the same time. The cloaked figure that appears out of nowhere on top of the overturned vehicle in the third trailer apparently might be Mads Mikkelsen, since they both make the same gesture with their hand. This in fact lends even more credence to the theory that Mads' character has some sort of a connection to the 5 interdimensional beings. What's more, in the scene where Sam is floating underwater, if you look closely, you can spot a doll that looks a whole lot like the doll in the second trailer. And speaking of that underwater scene, the realm of death. It's entirely possible that the scene that shows Sam underwater is actually depicting him in the world of the dead. Kojima has confirmed that the concept of death in Death Stranding won't be like any other video game we've ever seen before, and that when the player dies, rather than being taken to a traditional game over screen, they'll be sent to an environment that they can explore in first person. In the trailer, Sam can be seen underwater right after he is caught in the explosion emanating from the large interdimensional being. So, is this scene depicting what happens and where he ends up every time he dies? Definitely seems possible.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.